The Voice of Kronos. The Moral Alibi of Power, Social Darwinism, Corruption, and the Theology of Winning. In the last episode, we ended with a question of projection. How do societies externalize their own corruption, fear, and unresolved guilt onto enemies, outsiders, migrants, heretics, criminals, rival nations, or whatever human category becomes convenient for the preservation of the collective lie? That question remains before us. But today we must descend one level deeper. Because projection does not operate in a vacuum. Societies do not merely invent enemies because they are confused. They invent enemies because enemies are useful. They create scapegoats because scapegoats preserve the innocence of the powerful. They manufacture moral explanations because naked appetite is too obscene to display without ritual clothing. And so we arrive at the more brutal question. What if much of what we call success is not the triumph of virtue, discipline, intelligence, or merit, but the triumph of those most willing to violate the moral limits that bind ordinary human beings? What if the successful man is not, as the culture insists, the most deserving man, but often the man most capable of rationalizing what others would still recognize as fraud, exploitation, cruelty, or betrayal? What if morality, in the world as it is actually organized, is less a path to power than an impediment to it? This is where social Darwinism reappears, not as a respectable science. It is not that. It is a pseudoscientific mythology, a vulgar misapplication of biological language to social domination. But pseudoscience can still be politically useful. Social Darwinism tells the predator that predation is nature. It tells the conqueror that conquest is evolution. It tells the rich that wealth is evidence of fitness. It tells the poor that their suffering is proof of inferiority. It tells the powerful that mercy is weakness, solidarity is sentimentality, and exploitation is simply the grammar of life. This is the old lie in modern costume. The strong survive. The weak perish. The winner deserves to win. The loser deserves to lose. And from this point, morality becomes not a discipline of the soul, but an embarrassment. Compassion becomes inefficiency. Justice becomes interference. Truth becomes optional. Law becomes an obstacle to be managed. Religion becomes a brand. Patriotism becomes camouflage. Freedom becomes the right of the powerful to operate without consequence. This is why social Darwinism never truly disappeared. It migrated. It moved from racial theory into markets, from empire into national security, from colonial conquest into development policy, from slaveholding into labor discipline, from aristocracy into meritocracy, from divine election into Christian nationalism, from conquest into immigration panic, from plunder into shareholder value. The language changed, the structure remained. The modern predator rarely says, "I am exploiting you because I can." He says, "I am creating jobs. I am defending civilization. I am protecting the border. I am preserving tradition. I am restoring greatness. I am maximizing value. I am following the market. I am doing God's will. I am only doing what is necessary. Necessity is the favorite mask of cruelty. Here we must be precise. The problem is not simply that some men lie, cheat, steal, or exploit. That has always been true. The deeper problem is that entire systems are built to convert immoral conduct into rational conduct. In a weak moral order, the liar has an advantage over the honest man. The thief has an advantage over the restrained man. The propagandist has an advantage over the careful speaker. The corporation that externalizes harm has an advantage over the corporation that absorbs its own costs. The politician who tells the mob what it wants to hear has an advantage over the statesman who tells the people what they must confront. Under such conditions, immorality is not an accident. It becomes adaptive. And once immorality becomes adaptive, society begins to select for it. The cruel rise because they are unburdened. The shameless rise because shame no longer restrains them. The corrupt rise because corruption creates networks of mutual protection. The dishonest rise because truth is slower than spectacle. The demagogue rises because resentment is easier to mobilize than wisdom. This is not merely political decay, it is moral selection pressure. Capitalism, left to itself, does not correct this. Capitalism is not a moral philosophy. It is an engine of allocation, extraction, competition, accumulation, and return. It does not ask whether a thing is good. It asks whether a thing can be sold. It does not ask whether a desire is noble. It asks whether desire can be monetized. It does not ask whether harm exists. It asks whether harm can be externalized. This is why a system can destroy rivers, exhaust workers, poison communities, manipulate children, addict populations, destabilize democracies, and still describe itself as efficient. Efficient for whom? That is the Socratic question. Efficient by what standard? Profitable to whom? Costly to whom? Measured across what horizon? Accountable before what moral tribunal? The market has no conscience unless conscience is imposed upon it from outside. Without law, culture, restraint, and moral imagination, the market does not produce justice. It produces winners, and winners in a degraded culture are easily mistaken for the good. This is the childish theology of modern success. The man with the most toys wins. There is no deeper metaphysic, no higher anthropology, no mature account of the soul, no coherent vision of human flourishing, only accumulation, only display, only domination disguised as aspiration. The billionaire becomes a prophet, the executive becomes a genius, the politician becomes a savior, the celebrity becomes a moral authority, the conqueror becomes a founder. The fraud becomes a visionary, provided the fraud wins long enough. This is why success must be interrogated, not envied, not worshipped, interrogated. What did it cost? Who paid the price? Who was silenced? What was hidden? What was stolen? What was destroyed? What lie had to be believed so that this man could appear admirable? A civilization that cannot ask these questions is not serious. It is merely impressed. And then comes religion. Religion should be the force that interrupts predation. At its best, it tells the strong that strength is not righteousness. It tells the rich that wealth is spiritually dangerous. It tells the ruler that power is accountable. It tells the tribe that the stranger bears dignity. It tells the human being that the soul cannot be purchased by victory. But religion captured by power becomes the opposite of religion. It becomes moral laundering. The predator kneels before the altar and rises absolved without repentance. The nationalist invokes God while despising the foreigner. The rich man praises providence while exploiting the poor. The politician quotes scripture while cultivating cruelty. The public sinner performs public piety and is baptized by the crowd as a persecuted champion. This is not faith, it is theater, and worse, it is theater with victims. The Bible itself contains the danger. There are passages of mercy, humility, forgiveness, and liberation. But there are also passages of conquest, chosenness, extermination, slavery, purity, wrath, and divine permission. When read through the appetite for power, These texts become weapons. The chosen people becomes the chosen race. The promised land becomes territorial entitlement. The enemy tribe becomes the contaminating outsider. The conquest becomes purification. The divine command becomes exemption from ordinary morality. This is why religious language is so easily recruited by empire. It gives metaphysical dignity to material ambition. It allows a people to do what they wanted to do anyway, but now with the voice of heaven behind them. The same structure appears across traditions, ideologies, and nations. The content changes. The mechanism does not. First, name the enemy. Then dehumanize the enemy. Then describe cruelty as defense. Then describe domination as order. Then describe victory as proof of righteousness. At the end of this process, the immoral act no longer appears immoral to the actor. It appears necessary, sacred, historical, natural, or patriotic. This is the moral alibi of power. The Nazi use of social Darwinism remains the most obscene modern case because it fused race, nature, myth, pseudoscience, state power, technology, bureaucracy, and mass death into one ideological machine. But the lesson is not that Nazism was uniquely evil and therefore safely quarantined in the past. The lesson is that the logic beneath it is reproducible. Whenever a society says that some lives are burdens, some people are contaminants, some groups are naturally inferior, some suffering is deserved, some populations must be removed, some cruelty is necessary for national rebirth, and some leader stands beyond ordinary moral judgment, the structure has returned. It may not wear the swastika. It may wear a suit. It may carry a Bible. It may speak of security. It may speak of markets. It may speak of freedom. It may speak of greatness. It may speak of innovation. It may speak of civilization. But the structure is recognizable. The United States is not innocent of this. It has often spoken the language of liberty while practicing hierarchy. It has spoken of democracy while supporting domination. It has spoken of human rights while tolerating or imposing extraordinary human suffering abroad. It has spoken of equal dignity while organizing entire populations into categories of suspicion, disposability, and exclusion. Iraq and Afghanistan revealed this with devastating clarity. The stated language was security, freedom, democracy, liberation, counterterrorism, stability, and moral necessity. But beneath that language lay faulty assumptions, ideological vanity, bureaucratic self-protection, contractor incentives, intelligence failures, political cowardice, and a remarkable inability to understand the societies being transformed by force. The result was not merely strategic failure. It was moral catastrophe. And yet catastrophe was renamed sacrifice. Failure was renamed resolve. Withdrawal was renamed betrayal. Devastation was renamed the cost of freedom. This is how empires protect themselves from self-knowledge. Jung would tell us that this is shadow projection. The nation cannot bear its own greed, so it sees greed in the enemy. It cannot bear its own violence, so it calls the other barbaric. It cannot bear its own corruption, so it imagines corruption as foreign contamination. It cannot bear its own spiritual emptiness, so it performs public religion with increasing volume. It cannot bear its own decadence, so it invents an outsider who has polluted the body politic. The immigrant becomes the shadow. The poor become the shadow. The foreigner becomes the shadow. The heretic becomes the shadow. The dissident becomes the shadow. The racial other becomes the shadow. The defeated nation becomes the shadow. But what is hunted outside is often what has been denied within. This is the psychology of scapegoating. The scapegoat is not chosen because he is guilty in proportion to the hatred directed at him. He is chosen because his destruction offers psychic relief to those who refuse self-judgment. Here Nietzsche becomes unavoidable. He understood that moral language is often not the opposite of power, but one of power's most effective instruments. Human beings do not merely dominate by force. They dominate by naming. They dominate by defining virtue and vice in ways that serve their position. The powerful call their domination order. The resentful call their envy justice. The weak may call their impotence purity. The cruel may call their cruelty discipline. The greedy may call their greed ambition. The cowardly may call their cowardice prudence. Nietzsche forces us to ask, who benefits from this morality? What instinct hides beneath this virtue? What will is concealed inside this doctrine? What appetite has learned to speak in holy language? These questions are merciless and therefore necessary, because moral language can purify the soul, but it can also conceal rot. But Nietzsche alone is insufficient. If we only expose morality as power, we risk falling into the final vulgarity, the belief that all morality is fraud and only power is real. That is the abyss into which social Darwinism falls. The answer to false morality is not amorality. The answer to hypocritical virtue is not predation. The answer to corrupt religion is not nihilism. The answer to capitalist cruelty is not the worship of force. The answer is a more severe morality, a morality without sentimentality, a morality that understands power, a morality that does not confuse success with goodness, a morality that can look at winners without kneeling, a morality that can look at losers without contempt, a morality that can distinguish discipline from domination, excellence from exploitation, greatness from spectacle, and strength from cruelty. Stoicism helps here. The Stoic does not ask whether the world is fair. He knows it is not. He does not ask whether corrupt men rise. He knows they do. He does not ask whether fools can become kings. Criminals can become presidents. Liars can become prophets. Or cowards can become patriots. History has answered. The Stoic question is different. What remains within my command? Judgment, speech, conduct, refusal, discipline, witness. The decision not to become inwardly governed by the corruption one condemns. This is not passive. It is not naive. It is the last defensible sovereignty. Because if the corrupt man controls not only the institution, but also your soul, then his victory is complete. Buddhism also clarifies the matter. The root is craving, not merely desire in the ordinary sense, but the deep metaphysical hunger to become solid through acquisition, identity, victory, possession, recognition, dominance, and permanence. The capitalist wants more. The nationalist wants purity. The empire wants control. The demagogue wants adoration. The religious hypocrite wants righteousness without transformation. The technocrat wants mastery without wisdom. The billionaire wants exemption from limits. The mob wants innocence through hatred. All of this is craving, and craving, when institutionalized, becomes civilization-scale suffering. This is why the world does not merely suffer from bad policies. It suffers from organized attachment. Entire economies depend on dissatisfaction. Entire political movements depend on resentment. Entire media systems depend on agitation. Entire religious industries depend on guilt, fear, and tribal identity. The soul is not accidentally disturbed. It is harvested. So we return to the original claim. Must one cheat to succeed? In a just order, no. In a corrupt order, often yes. But that answer requires discipline. The point is not that every successful person is immoral. That would be too crude. The point is that the highest levels of power frequently reward those willing to make moral compromises that ordinary people are punished for. Petty criminals go to prison. Elite criminals restructure the market. Poor liars are condemned. Powerful liars create narratives. Small thieves are prosecuted. Large thieves hire counsel. The desperate are called lawless. The insulated are called strategic. This is not morality. It is class power speaking in legal grammar. And yet, one must not collapse into despair, because the recognition that corruption is pervasive is not the same as the conclusion that corruption is ultimate. A society can reward vice and still be judged. A man can gain the world and still lose himself. A system can dominate history and still fail before truth. A nation can call itself chosen and still stand condemned by its own conduct. The task is not to pretend that goodness guarantees victory. It does not. The task is to refuse the lie that victory guarantees goodness. That distinction matters. It may be the only distinction that preserves moral sanity in a collapsing age. Closing. Social Darwinism is not Darwinism. It is a distortion of Darwin's biological insight, converted into a crude moral excuse for domination. Darwin described natural selection as a process by which species adapt over time. He did not teach that wealth, conquest, cruelty, or social hierarchy are proof of moral superiority. What Darwin revealed was the complexity of life, adaptation, interdependence, and survival under conditions of change. Social Darwinism vulgarized that insight into an ideology of power, telling the strong that their dominance is natural, the poor that their suffering is deserved, and the predator that predation is virtue. In that sense, social Darwinism is less a continuation of Darwin than a betrayal of him, science stripped of humility, converted into mythology for the ambitious, the ruthless, and the morally unrestrained. Social Darwinism is the theology of the predator, after God has been replaced by victory. It tells the strong that they are good because they are strong. It tells the rich that they are wise because they are rich. It tells the nation that conquest is destiny. It tells the mob that cruelty is purification. It tells the corrupt that success is absolution. Against this we must recover a harder truth. Winning is not proof of virtue. Power is not proof of wisdom. Wealth is not proof of merit. Survival is not proof of righteousness. And success, when purchased through deception, exploitation, or cruelty, is not success in any moral sense. It is merely predation with applause. The age does not lack religion. It lacks reverence. It does not lack language. It lacks truth. It does not lack winners. It lacks worthy men. It does not lack power. It lacks judgment. And perhaps this is where resistance begins. Not with the fantasy that moral conduct always wins, but with the refusal to let immoral victory define the meaning of life. Until next time, my friends, the voice of Kronos says goodbye. Before you leave, please help strengthen the channel. Like this episode, if it gave you something worth thinking about. Subscribe to Voice of Kronos for more work on philosophy, myth, psychology, and the human condition. Leave a comment below with your strongest agreement, objection, or question. This channel grows through serious thought, not passive consumption. Share the episode with someone who still believes ideas matter. And watch the next episode on screen. support the signal. Like, subscribe, comment, share.